adjust for this, the cost of living in California, something like 40% higher than the rest of the country. Cost of real estate, roughly double, and you basically have to replace the middle class in one way or another. Carol Quigley, the Georgetown historian from the 50s and 60s, professor at Georgetown, had this line in 1960 that I still think is very accurate today, which is that the Republicans are the party of the middle class and the Democrats are the party of everybody else. And if you sort of have, so there's sort of a way that the California economy, if you say the only middle class people left are government workers, and then all the rest of the middle class were sort of evicting to these other states over time, it is no wonder that you get sort of a D+30 state. That just follows naturally from these super distorted real estate and political dynamics. Now, there's probably a lot more one could say about the real estate stuff. I keep thinking that it's obviously very dysfunctional to have mass homelessness. It's very dysfunctional to have no law and order. But if you think of it as a sort of inefficient redistributionist strategy, there's a lot of it that has a certain weird, perverse logic. I'll just sort of describe this verbally, but if you have a super negative supply curve with an inelasticity of -2, where if you add 1% supply to housing and the prices go down 2%, or if you reduce the supply by 1%, the prices go up by 2%. And so, the more housing you build, the less it is collectively worth. The less you have, the more it is collectively worth. If you get to something that's that inelastic, probably from the point of view of housing as a financial asset, all sorts of things that seem like social pathologies just become features. I think even something as crazy as the out-of-control homeless situation in San Francisco, where I lived for 15 years, for many years you could think of as it was sort of like this controlled thing where the homeless people were in the lower parts of town. They didn't climb up the hills. And then if you had this sort of plague of homeless people, they were sort of messing up these neighborhoods, and you had this negative, highly negative elasticity of real estate. The value of the houses on the hills went up way more than the value of the houses on the flat parts went down. And so you have to think of the homeless people as like this feature to increase the value of sort of the higher end real estate in the city. And that's sort of this cauldron you're stirring. And there's probably some version like this with defund the police, no law and order. In theory, that's bad for San Francisco, but then it drives up the house prices in Marin way more than it lowers them in San Francisco. So it's again, in a world where the housing is this dysfunctional, all these weird things become possible. There's a version that's in Palo Alto where you have this sort of eyesore called East Palo Alto. You would think it should have just been razed to the ground and redeveloped 20, 30 years ago, but it has just the effect again of massively driving up the prices, where the real estate is basically a very, very inefficient and screwed up way to redirect the gold rush profits from tech. So incredible misgovernance on every level. And then sort of the way I would summarize the California framing is that it's not the worst oil country, it's not the best. It's roughly somewhere in between. It's not as good as Norway. We're not as bad as Equatorial Guinea, and you should think of it as basically roughly on par with Saudi Arabia.